fashion drawing. And I thought it would be nice to talk about this just because as illustrators we draw characters, and if you draw a character, particularly a human character, but sometimes anthropomorphized characters,
I was going to say, this has no reflection on your fashion, does it?
No, it doesn't, not personal.
You're not a fashion
No, but
influencer.
I enjoy drawing fashion. And so
From the man who has the same shirt in the same colour.
Okay,
yeah, 10 versions.
But don't forget, Katie, I was invited to I'm going to draw a sort of fashionable gentleman.
Okay. We'll see how fashionable he is.
Exactly. I mean, he might be fashionable in another age. But I think I was going to say, don't forget that I was invited by no lesser institution than the Victoria and Albert Museum to give a lecture on fashion in illustration. And so I turned up in my sort of usual jeans and, slightly...
Fleece.
Not fleece exactly, but a sort of blue jacket with lots of pockets.
Wear fleece?
And sort of talked about mainly the sort of fashions in my series I do with Paul Stewart called The Edge Chronicles. So it turned into a sort of chat about Edge Chronicle fashions.
Oh, yeah.
Of which there are many, but there are other...
I can't remember what the spiky jacket's called.
It's a hammer horn
yes.
waistcoat.
Of course.
And it has the property, it actually, like the hair on a dog's back, a hammer horn fleece will actually spike up. The hair will sort of become sort of spiky if the wearer is in danger. Which is a nice sort of...
Yes, that should come in handy.
It is. Now I'm doing a sort of interesting hat. It was going to be a top hat, but now it's turned into something a little bit more sort of...
So what are your tips for fashion, fashion design and...
Well, I mean, if you're doing something contemporary, then there's nothing better than actually putting to use those catalogues that come through.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, that's probably good, just copying the catalogues.
Exactly.
That Mum gets.
To sort of draw, contemporary fashion. I think that's a good way in. But the other thing is when you're maybe drawing more imaginatively or sort of fantasy elements, things that sort of you're inventing, it's always nice to think about embellishments. What sort of lapel are you going to draw? You can draw an ordinary lapel, or you can draw a sort of I don't know the technical name for it, but the sort of dress coat lapel.
Yes, one must consider that.
Yeah. Think about the sleeves. Are they just going to be ordinary sleeves, or do you want to sort of make them a little bit more characterful, as I'm doing now? There's a sort of, lots of, and cuffs are very interesting. When I was about 10, I could actually tell you the colour of the individual regiments at the Battle of Waterloo, what the colour of their cuffs were.
All right.
Yeah, if it was a Guards regiment, they were dark blue. But if it was, say, a regiment from East Essex, they were yellow. Light infantry had what they called, would have green cuffs.
Fascinating stuff.
I know. I was fascinated by by uniforms and the different. So I think that's when I first started to think about, drawing costume in a way. And I think we're talking maybe costume as well as fashion.
Yeah, I think maybe you're more of a costume person.
Yes, and I think we all are when it comes to making our characters look. I mean, that's much more contemporary, I can see. And she's giving my character a sort of rather withering look, I've got to say. He's so unfashionable, my goodness. I think I'm always interested in people who cosplay, and I remember being at Brighton Station one day and seeing
Some of those outfits are pretty amazing, though.
a young man who dresses as in Regency costume, authentic Regency costume,
Oh, wow.
and he was going off somewhere, some country house somewhere, and he was getting the train dressed, as if he'd just stepped out of a Jane Austen novel. It was amazing to see, and really quite sort of, wonderful to see.
Yeah.
Equally, I once remember seeing Grayson Perry at a party, and he was wearing an extraordinary dress that had like a furry sporran sewn into.
What's a sporran?
It's like I shall draw a sporran. It's like it's a purse that Scottish Scottish men would wear with their kilts. It's like
Right, yes, yeah.
but Grayson Perry's sporran had a zip down the front, like that, and it was like fake fur on the front of his,
I like what that's
sort
suggesting.
of diurnal dress. And as I watched, he was aware that all of us were watching. He unzipped his sporran and took out a handkerchief, and it was the rudest thing I've ever seen in plain sight. And what it did is it sort of illustrated, in a sense, I think, his ideology or philosophy, which was that, fashion, in a sense, because it's so personal to all of us, can also be deeply subversive. At the same time, it's just fabric. So it's a very clever and interesting conceptual thing to say, this purse that I have stitched onto the front of my dress, and I'm wearing a dress and I'm a man, and I'm a man, but I'm wearing a wig and makeup. All these things are setting up a sort of cultural dissonance that makes certain people really uncomfortable or angry.
I like it. It's like testing the boundaries and what like how you make people feel, and why do we feel that way, or why does the person feel like, oh, that doesn't look right, or whatever it is that
and the power
have been conditioned to believe.
Yeah. And so I think fashion, as well as sort of saying something about you, also can be both subversive. We mentioned uniform. Uniform is a way of exerting, showing power, showing that you are part of an organisation. And sometimes the lack of uniform, in a sense, if you are sort of like a militia and you're sort of just in combats and there's no insignia or anything, that can be deeply subversive and worrying. So the clothes we wear, I think, are very significant.
One thing I'd like to get better at is kind of folds in fabric and
yes. Well, that just comes that comes through both observation and it comes through time. Now the folds here are good generally. I would say you could sort of almost describe folds a little bit more. I quite like these sort of little lines where you go down and then go up, and that suggests a crease in a fold. Also in the crook of an arm, I often do this. This is my sort of preferred way to draw creases and folds, and then you can just sort of, work out from that the form that you're describing. But when you're doing these sort of folds, it's often, I've been drawing this sort of figure, a sort of cloaked figure, draped, almost like a sort of, spectre at a ghost at a party. That is all about how fabric folds, and you just have to draw it often and sort of remember it. And another exercise you could do is just take a sheet, a bed sheet or a duvet cover or something, drape it over a chair and just draw the folds, because they are intricate and it's like a landscape. It's a wonderful landscape. And so sometimes when I'm approaching these sort of things, I just enjoy, in a sense, the detail and the sort of sense of the landscape that can come across when you draw in that way. The other thing I quite enjoy, we're straying from fashion, but I'm a sort of fan of the music of Phoebe Bridges, my very good friend Phoebe Bridges.
Yeah, we all know your obsession with Phoebe Bridges.
It's not an obsession.
It's an unhealthy obsession. It needs to stop.
Creative, two creative minds. But she has a little, I suppose, a meme almost of a little ghost. You know, one of those traditional, almost cartoon ghosts that float around.
It's very trendy.
It is, isn't it?
It's very trendy.
But I think she was an early adopter of that sort of thing.
She did it before it was cool.
Yeah. It's fun to introduce that sort of element. And there's a wonderful film that came out a few years ago, and I forget the name of it, maybe you can tell me, where a couple have an accident just outside at the end of a lane of their house. There's a sort of, you don't see it, you just hear, they leave the house and the door closes and they drive down their road and there's a sound of an accident. And then the next thing you know, they come back in and they're wearing sheets like this. And they spend the rest of the film as sheets.
Yeah, what is that called? Is that called like a ghost story?
A ghost story.
Or something?
I think it was called a ghost story. And it's a beautiful sort of shortcut, I think, for suggesting an afterlife, this construction, which I think began as a sort of 19th century, horror trope, which is the figure in its winding sheet rising from and wandering through, and the holes in the bed sheet, in a sense, is this extra almost pantomime quality to sort of, for people dressing up. But it also has, in other senses, horrific echoes of the sort of hooded vigilantes, the Ku Klux Klan, all the, any Ned Kelly, any of these gangs that would sort of wear hoods to conceal their identities. So it has all this sort of power, and it comes from costume, I think. And it's funny, we've gone from fashion drawing to talking about ghosts and bed sheets, but that's often the way these things. I'm going to give you your pencil back. I think I suppose the other thing as well is the idea of sort of historical costume, and it's always nice to go to a museum. And I would say the V&A is a very good museum for doing this. But the last time I did this, I was up in North Yorkshire, at the vicarage where the Bronte sisters lived. And they have a wonderful little museum up there. And it's like stepping back in time, going into the vicarage. And they have the Bronte sisters, I think they've got Emily Bronte's dress in a case. And it is really evocative I spent an hour or so just drawing Emily Bronte's dress in this glass case, and one really sort of felt, in a sense, sort of close to the person as you did that, and that was a lovely experience. The other thing I used to love to do as a student was go to the Brighton Museum, where they used to have, they don't have it on display anymore, but they used to have George IV's enormous trousers.
Do they don't have that anymore?
It's in the collection, but it's not on display.
Oh.
I'd like to lead a campaign for the George IV's enormous trousers to come out of storage, so we can all marvel at their girth. They are magnificent. He was a big chap in all sorts of ways. And Beau Brummel, the great fashionable dandy is a chap called Beau Brummel, and he was famous in 18th century society for the way he dressed. And he was an early adopter of the suit as a way to dress. A suit of clothes all in one colour. And what his thing was, not decoration. He was called a dandy, but he was sort of, in a way, a fashion icon, because he favoured greys and dove blues and muted colours. He wasn't into all this sort of... the people who used to dress in very flamboyant, decorative clothes were called macaronis, because because it was an Italian look.
Oh, I see.
And a foppish Italian look. Beau Brummel wasn't a macaroni. He was his own sort of style icon, and he once he fell from grace when he met a friend who was with the then Prince Regent George IV, who later became George IV, and he was at a party, and he knew it was the Prince Regent, but being Beau Brummel, he was too sort of fashionable to even acknowledge it. So he turned to the friend who was with him and said to the person he knew, "Who's your fat friend?"
Oh, rude.
Well, exactly, and that ruined his reputation. George IV was so fed up with him that everyone shunned him in society. for making that remark.
Wow, there you go. Fashion drawing with a bit of history.
Yes, absolutely. And just to...
Ever be educated, Dad.
Yeah, and just to sort of round this whole little sort of essay off, one of my characters in Goth Girl is in fact a diarist, someone who writes things down, a little bit like Samuel Pepys.
Okay.
But he's also a really good shepherd and fashion icon. And so I called him Bo Peeps. Anyway, please yourself.
That's enough of that then.
Yeah, you've been a lovely audience.
Right.
I also made him look like my friend Jonathan, who is in fact an artist but used to be a shepherd.
That one might be lost on a lot of people.
It will be. It will be. So a little bit of fashion drawing.